Christmas is over, and that means it's time to get back to working on cars. Before we dive into the intricate and somewhat tedious process of fabricating a heater box, we'll first tackle another not so glamorous but equally important task, strengthening the gear shifter. While testing it out, I noticed a slight flex whenever it was being used, and that's something that needs to be addressed. The first step in this process is to create a sturdy crossbeam to reinforce the setup. For this, I used a piece of L-shaped steel. The plan was to cut it to size so that it could be securely bolted down to the transmission tunnel. And once in place, the crossbeam would then be welded to the brackets we previously fabricated. Now, this may not be the most exciting part of the build, but it's those small, detail-orientated tasks that lay the foundation for a reliable and well-functioning car. Plus, it's always satisfying to see these structural improvements come together. Once the beam had been cut to size and welded on, it was then time for the next bit that I always leave far too long, and that is painting parts. This always feels like a bit of a project that just takes forever, but it's necessary, and after all, no one likes a rusty knob. Gear knob, shifter, whatever, you know what I mean. So, after literally sitting and watching paint dry for a bit, I could then get everything back onto the car, and for once, everything just dropped back into place. And did it work? Yup, sort of. One little issue to address is that this shifter is actually for a 3-speed gearbox, but the gearbox on this car is 4-speed. So I can feel that the gear shift positions don't exactly line up with the gear shifter notches. It's not too much of a problem, but it will need addressing a little bit down the line. Okay, next it was time to do one of those bits that you don't really think about with cars, but you'd soon notice if it wasn't there, and that is the heater system. There's an old adage that is actually pretty true, that the way you manufacture cars is to start with a heater box and then assemble the rest of the car around it. The heater box sits under the dashboard and is basically a large box that contains the heater matrix, which is basically just a small radiator, a powerful fan, and a series of vents to let hot or cold air out towards the screen or passengers. Most modern cars also have an air conditioning setup included, but I'm not bothering with that here because it's too complex, and at the end of the day, I can just lower the roof if I want it to be cooler. I did have a good look round on eBay to see if I could find a complete fan heater unit that would just bolt in, but unfortunately they were all far too big. The ridiculous thing about this car is that whilst it is very large, it has at least the same footprint as a Range Rover, it doesn't seem to actually have any space inside it. And this is because the engine is pushed so far back in the chassis that it's technically mid-engined. And the huge engine therefore takes up most of the space that normal cars would use for the heater. So the only option was to make my own heater box, but use a fan from something else. In this case, a Renault Clio. It's a fairly compact unit, but as I've discovered with my VR projects, it shifts a decent amount of air without being too noisy. The first step with making the box was to create a flat plate that could bolt onto the fan unit. And for this, it was back to good old-fashioned cardboard-aided design to work out the shape. Then a few minutes with an angle grinder and we had our first part. The next stage was to work out where the heater matrix was going to go. The heater box itself needed to have 2 basic outlets, one for hot air and one for cold. So I decided to put the matrix at a slant and weld on 60mm steel tubes either side for the air to escape from. Hopefully this diagram gives you some sort of an idea. The air flows up from the fan unit, which is bolted underneath, and can either head left into the cold outlet tube or through the heater matrix and right into the hot air outlet. Obviously, to stop it blowing hot and cold at the same time, I will need some sort of external control, but that will come later. For now, I just want to be able to get everything packaged and mounted in the car. Right, there's only so much I can say about cutting and welding steel tubes, so let me just show you.
all the things you've done. Maybe it's just gin and justifications. Tell me how you pray to gods whose hands are red with blood. As pretty as you are, it's pretty sad what you've become. Don't try to come and save my soul. Don't try to pray to bring me home. It's the last time you'll see me, last time to God. You're beautiful, you're sick inside, and I'm not. Tell me how you do it. Maybe
So that was the first stage of getting the box made. And the next step was to work out where in the car it was going to go and how I could mount it. To give you a bit more detail, I will therefore allow Garage Me to take you through it. So apologies for the rubbish sound quality. Okay, so this is what the heater box fan unit and heater matrix looks like, and there are some issues we need to think about. First one is to make sure that there's always enough room, once that heater vent is there, for a 60mm tube to come all the way down here and then round there somehow into something. Biggest issue we've got though with these pipes, which are the hot water feed from the engine, somehow we've got to get water into those, and that gap there is not very big. So the obvious thing would be to do is take this and move it this way a bit. The problem with that is we've then got the air pipe that feeds round to the demister vents, and that is sitting precisely in the wrong place. On top of that, we've also got the issue that the fan unit itself, which is sitting here, sits dangerously close to where I want the A-post pillar and cover to be, that we need to remanufacture so it works the same as the other side.
Oh, come on!
So this is one of those things where it all annoyingly nearly fits, but also doesn't completely fit. More pondering is required. Right, so when it comes to the make it up as you go along design methodology, the first thing you need to do is realise what the next step is. So with all these sort of things, it's a case of build a bit, stand back, look at it a bit, and then work out what we need to do next. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I need to be able to actually get this heater matrix more firmly fixed, so I know that it's definitely in the right place. And I think the obvious thing to do to start with is, if we weld on something like that across there, then at least we know where it is that end. We'll have a similar piece on the back, but that's less of an issue, because the issue we've got right now is that's where the cold air comes out there, and we need to have something somewhere around there for the hot air to come out. But when the hot air comes out, we also need at some point potentially to be able to get the heater matrix out. So I think if we put that reference piece across there, at least we've got something to work with. So let's do that next. So as you can see, there may actually be some benefits after all to planning out everything before you make it. But where would be the fun in that? I actually kind of like the challenge of engineering around little setbacks, and sometimes the resulting article is all the more satisfying as a result. Okay, so I needed a tiny bit of extra clearance
to sit across the top of the heater matrix for this piece that's going to go across there, and it was only about 1mm. So the easiest way to do that is just actually build up some extra material on there with weld, grind it down, and then as you can see we've got our little step, and that should be just about the right amount, which we'll find out in a minute when it's all cooled down.
So that's about it for this week. It's been good to get back into the garage after the holiday period, and I'm looking forward to a new year with lots of car progress. Obviously, we've got more heater to build next episode, but after that, I think we can move on to something much more satisfying. Let's see if we can get the car to actually run.